I don't want anyone to die. You don't want anyone to die. I would love for no one to die. That would be fantastic, which is why we want to get rid of the reason people are dying. And that is this military occupation and colonial apartheid system. And like anybody who dies on either side here is on Israel's hands because they have created the situation. Just like, and I keep making the slave example because I think it actually is very apt. Just like if like there's a slave revolt and a bunch of plantation families are killed, I blame the plantation system for that. I don't blame the slaves for fighting people who are literally like taking away their freedom. So that's why we're talking like that's, and all of this is a distraction from that primary fact, like that primary fact, which is that this is the source of all of this violence that you claim to hate so much. So why aren't you talking about the source of the violence? Instead, you're talking about the people fighting it. Like, give me
no, it's such a reduction and it's such a false equivalency because they want to reduce everything to Hamas bad. Israel's taking it too far. Israel needs to do something to respond to Hamas, but what can they do? The problem is, Rania, and this goes back to Israeli society, is that Israel cannot react in a mode of self-defense without being completely genocidal in their actions because they've revealed their final solution. We know the end goal of what Israeli society, Israeli government has set forth with the eradication and the forced surrender of Hamas. We understand what that means. And so when Piers Morgan and all these other people who are pontificating about what capacity should Israel respond? What right do they have? How far should they go? Yeah, they're maybe taking it a little too far, but what could they have done about Hamas? It's like, no. They don't have the right to do anything. We need to take it back to the root of the violence, Rania. And that's why I'm really happy that you did that as well, because there is no equivalency. There is absolutely no equivalency. And so to reduce it down to that narrative is dysfunctional and really just obfuscates the actual reality that anyone can see who studied this. The people who are on record being like, I condemn Hamas for doing this. And like, yes, I also condemn the Israeli government for taking their response too far. It's like they want to appear legitimate in the eyes of the ruling class. So you have like, people like Naomi Klein, out there being like, calling pro-Palestine protests right on the aftermath of October 7th, like pro-Hamas rallies. And it's really kind of grotesque because those people really do want to appeal to the ruling class and they're very desperate for legitimacy in those people's eyes. And I think that's really kind of offensive to liberation struggles in general.
Abby, you made a really good point about what all of this means about Israeli society. And last time you were on, we talked about some of the reporting that you've done from Jerusalem in the past, where you just kind of recorded Israelis being insane and genocidal and how normal it was. But that was like, almost a decade ago. And now here we are in 2024. And we see crazy rhetoric from not just regular people in the streets, but like the defense minister has no problem being genocidal. The prime minister has no problem being genocidal. I mean, the South Africans built an entire case around genocidal intent based on the statements that are very cavalierly made by one Israeli official after another who's responsible for prosecuting this war. And then we see it's trickled down to the population because we see they're very confident in themselves and totally comfortable posting these videos to TikTok where they're like committing war crimes openly, happily. Here in Lebanon, anybody who uses a dating app in Lebanon, actually, like the GPS, disruptors that the Israelis use have caused problems with GPS. So you see a lot of Israelis on the dating app in like Beirut, and it's like they're wearing their uniforms and they're like proudly, in some cases, people post, they're like excited to show you they've been genociding. And also other people posted Israelis on dating apps, like basically, photographing themselves in front of lingerie. They put that on dating apps. They show themselves like happily blowing up mosques as punishment, schools as punishment, saying they're happy to kill babies, admitting to killing babies and enjoying it. Like, this is a society so scarily high on hate with no red lines. So I'm just curious, what do you have to say about the Israeli society that you're witnessing very comfortably live streaming themselves, carrying out a genocide after having been there on the ground and hearing them say the kinds of things they wanted to do to Palestinians and Arabs?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy that that was almost a decade ago during a period of relative calm. Obviously, it's never a period of relative calm for Palestinians. They're getting massacred and brutalized and humiliated and subjugated every single day. But for Israelis in Jerusalem, I mean, it was just like a day in the suburbs of, Portland, Oregon. I mean, you're just going to the mall at Sephora, just walking around in complete luxury and privilege. And so, yeah, it was really shocking to hear just during these Vox Pops, just randomly, the open genocidal incitement from Israelis. Nearly every single person I talked to was advocating to just kill them all, kick them all out, or just drop a nuke on Gaza. So fast forward to today and to see the mask completely ripped off Israeli society. Look at the polling. I mean, we always knew that Israeli society was becoming very fascist, but I think back during the Oslo Accords, there was this notion that Israel was a leftist project, the notion of the socialist kibbutzes. Even Bernie Sanders spent some time living there on a kibbutz. I mean, so I think over time, that notion of an Israeli left has diminished more and more. And so for the last 20 plus years, Israeli leaders have just laughed off that notion of the peace process, the two-state solution. I mean, that's always been a notion that's been used to placate American society and never really entertained or taken seriously in Israeli society. It's always been kind of a joke. And so, Israeli officials, the Likudniks, the Netanyahus, I mean, all of these people just have never. I mean, I saw a video of Netanyahu from like the 80s saying that there will never be a Palestinian state. So it's just like actually so offensive to just constantly be told by our politicians and media officials that no, Israeli society really does want this. And no, it's just Netanyahu. Netanyahu's the Trump of Israel. When really, I mean, we know that Trump was essentially one of the most American representations this country has ever had. He's not an aberration. He's actually perfectly crystallizes the problems, the deep-rooted problems of our sick serial killer society. And so it's the same thing with Netanyahu. Netanyahu is a perfect example of what Israel really is. Israel has become fully fascist, Nazi, genocidal society. Look at the polling. Over 90%, over 90% of Israelis agree with what's going on. They have, for every bloodletting in Gaza, every time that Israel decides to mow the lawn, the majority of Israeli societies, the vast majority of Israeli citizens agreed with that, Rania. And the numbers just keep ticking up and up and up because, look, in the wake of 9/11, we saw the mask ripped off American society, the disgusting patriotic fervor and unquestioning nationalism of Americans ripping out their reptile brain and just wanting to incite racism and violence against Arabs and Muslims around the world. That is nothing compared to what we're seeing in Israel. I mean, their 9/11, which was October 7th, has just basically given them carte blanche to just become who they always were, Rania. It's a society built on ethnic cleansing. It's a society that you need to espouse the most dehumanizing, racist views possible in order to justify these policies. If you're an Israeli citizen and you're living in Israel 20 miles away from a concentration camp, if I was living 10 miles away from Auschwitz, like I wouldn't be able to be there, right? So you have to grow up from cradle to grave hating Muslims, hating Palestinians with such a deep-seated hatred that this is justified, that it's justified to throw them in a cage and deprive them of clean water. You have to think they're barbarians and you have to think that they're animals. And the leftists in Israel, I mean, if you want to call yourself a leftist, I think that a lot of people who are in the Labor Party and a lot of people who call themselves leftists still are fascists, right?
Mm-hmm.
The most left-wing Israeli is a right-wing American. And that's not saying much considering the political spectrum in this country. But a lot of left-wing Israelis, a lot of anti-Zionist Israelis who are actual leftists who disagree with these horrible policies have fled because a lot of them can. Why would you want to live in a fascist society? I wouldn't want to live in Berlin in 1930. I
No.
just wouldn't, right? I would get the fuck out of there. So I think that it speaks volumes just to be an Israeli and to be, living, you're living adjacent to the West Bank and this crazy military occupation and living adjacent to Gaza. But I think that especially now, especially now. Less than 2% of Israelis think that Israel's used too much firepower after they've completely obliterated the entirety of Gaza 8 months in. Rania, I mean, what does that say about the society? But let's not take this anecdotally with just polling, because we know polling can be skewed. Where are the protests? Where are the protests? It took months for a handful of Israelis to go out in the streets. Maybe not months, maybe a couple weeks for like 5 to 10 Israelis to go out in the streets to oppose the genocide. And let's go back to what you just said when we first started this. A couple weeks in, and already babies were being starved, thrown out of incubators, hospitals bombed. Where were the Israelis opposing this? So when there's no opposition in the streets, yes, and Israeli society is so fascist that they're arresting Israelis. It's scary to be a leftist Israeli and go out there and oppose this war. It's not only scary because you think that you could be arrested by your own government, because that's how fascist it is, but also your fellow Israeli citizens and neighbors, right, and colleagues will beat the shit out of you. I saw like Al Jazeera or something film like a handful of Israelis on the streets. This was like months into the genocide, Rania, and they were saying, we are scared to be out here. We're scared for our lives because we could get beat up, we could get assaulted, and we could get imprisoned. So it is so constrictive. I mean, politically and also just like vocally. I mean, you don't want to just speak out because you're so scared because of how fascist everyone around you is. And so it's this group thing it would just be terrifying to live there. And I think, I don't think there's any hope from within. I think this just speaks to why BDS is necessary. I've been saying this for 10 years. Look, I think the same applies to America to a certain extent, but Israel is so far gone. And even the liberal opposition, right, is out there signing bombs, signing their names on missiles that are going to bomb children in refugee camps, even the liberals. So, I mean, what do you say about this? What do you say about this other than there is no hope from within Israeli society? It is fully fascist and genocidal. And that's why you have to have this outside pressure to isolate them completely until they are forced to make apartheid fall, until they are forced to assimilate Palestinians into a one person, one vote project. I'm just hoping that this is the beginning of the end for the Zionist project, Rania, but unfortunately it's had to come after a massacre of untold magnitude.
Yeah, it's really, if you ever had to, justify a humanitarian intervention, this is it, because it will only come from outside. Israel cannot change from within for all the reasons you explain. And I think what's incredibly terrifying is obviously like what Palestinians are being subjected to, right? But then you see the enabling from the Americans. And so I want to show just an example of this enabling. There's a recent clip of an interaction between the press corps at the State Department and one of the State Department spokespeople. And this was after Nikki Haley, just to set this up, Nikki Haley visited, the rite of passage before any major election. And I guess she's trying to serve in the Trump administration is to go visit the settler colony America funds. And that's the state of Israel. So Nikki Haley visited. She went to the border near Gaza. She went to, I think, some West Bank settlements. And then she went to the north where Israel's been fighting a war with Lebanon's Hezbollah. And she signed a bomb and she took a photo of herself signing the bomb and she wrote on it, "Finish them." So that's the kind of rhetoric you're getting from the former U.S. ambassador to the UN. And you could argue, but she's like a Trump appointed person. But here is a Biden spokesperson responding to his thoughts on Nikki Haley doing that. So here we go.
Sorry, the follow-up to Said's question. If Nikki Haley's comments are made by a private citizen and therefore don't require any comment from you, why did this administration criticize people who spoke out in favor of those in Palestine demanding a ceasefire and were quite vocal? What's the difference?
When did we do that?
Well, do you want to talk about the number of times that they were described as anti-Semitic? Even any time there was a pro-Palestinian protest, it seemed to be that the administration
you were conflating 6 different things, and your question is a little bit not on the level. Let's talk about the facts here. Protests, whether they be on college campuses or elsewhere, they inherently are not anti-Semitic. There have been, of course, over the course of these protests been imagery, there have been chants, there have been slogans, there have been signage that has been anti-Semitic. Also, what we are talking about in those circumstances is protesters who, in some instances, have broken the law, taking over buildings, occupying certain areas within specific municipalities. Those are not expressions of free speech. That is illegal in some places. So these are very two different things, and I really don't appreciate you conflating.
Well, the fact is, you have said that a lot of the things said by the likes of Nikki Haley and others are simply rhetoric. Yet when you call for the destruction and annihilation of people, that's against international law. Why is that not being condemned from the platform?
That is not the kind of rhetoric that we certainly support from this administration, and it's not ones that we've been using. But Ambassador Haley is a private citizen. She doesn't speak for the United States. She doesn't speak for the United States. She doesn't speak for this administration.
There you have it. She's a private citizen. She's a private citizen, Abby. Therefore, her basically advocating genocide. Yeah. Her basically advocating genocide is no biggie, but a bunch of students protesting is, maybe a little bit anti-Semitic. And also, maybe they broke the law. I mean, maybe Rosa Parks broke the law. Who cares? Like, it's a stupid law. Like, I mean.
Like, if you agree that genocide's being committed, which this asshole doesn't, obviously, but like, if you agree that it does, like, anything's game, right? Because it's the most serious crime that a state can commit. So, like, we should be escalating our tactics to extreme levels to try to force our politicians to do the right thing. So,
yeah.
Well, occupying buildings is kind of like nothing, dude.
Yeah. Well, I just want to play one more, and this is also I want to place this in the context. I want to place this in the context of the fact that it's like so it cannot stop itself. It's so like ready to do what you said, final solution. And so here's another example of what we're dealing with when it comes to the Americans who are supposed to be in charge.
Yeah. As I said, we don't want to see a major ground operation. We haven't seen that at this point.
How many more charred corpses does he have to see before the president considers a change in policy?
We don't want to see a single more innocent life taken. And I kind of take a little offense at the question. No civilian casualties is the right number of civilian casualties. And this is not something that we've turned a blind eye to, nor has it been something we've ignored or neglected to raise with our Israeli counterparts, including, Ed, this weekend as a result of this particular strike. Now, they're investigating it, so let's let them investigate it and see what they come up with.
But the president doesn't have like a personal limit to this?
The president has been very clear and very direct about what our expectations are for Israeli operations in Rafah specifically, but in Gaza writ large. We don't support, we won't support a major ground operation in Rafah. And we've, again, been very consistent on that. And the president said that should that occur, then it might make him have to make different decisions in terms of support. We haven't seen that happen at this point.
Why not have him come out and say that himself?
The president has been speaking to leaders throughout the region on a regular basis. He has been addressing you guys in various fora. You've got plenty of opportunities to talk to the president, including, I might add, in a press conference last week.
I mean, it's just so insane. This was, by the way, after the tent massacre. That's when that question happened. It was after the first tent massacre, because, by the way, there was others that happened, just like with Israel with the hospitals. They do it once. Everyone's like, oh, my God, this is horrible. And then they do it 12 more times. And everyone's like, well, I guess this is normal now. And the same thing is happening in Rafah. They're just like massacring refugees in tents to the point where it doesn't matter. But this is also happening in like combination with, obviously arming Israel to do whatever they want. Basically, there are no limits. And then on top of that, you have mostly from Republican members of Congress and senators, you'll have statements like Republican Congressman Max Miller was on Fox News a few months back and said we should turn Gaza into a parking lot. You had Lindsey Graham more recently essentially say we should nuke Gaza, just like the Israelis should nuke Gaza, just like they should be allowed to, just like the Americans nuked Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that he said that over the anniversary of those atomic bombings. But all to say, like, yes, this shows Israeli society is unhinged, fascist from top to bottom. I don't believe American society is fascist from top to bottom, but from top, Like, what does this say about American society and the American government?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, the mask has been fully ripped off from the bipartisan consensus of just white privilege and the complete dehumanization of brown people yet again. I mean, it just feels like 9/12, 2001. I mean, this was the sentiment. This was what it was like. And I can't even imagine for people like you, Rania. I mean, to grow up Arab in a post 9/11 world, I mean, it was absolutely heinous and disgusting, the rhetoric.
If you enjoyed